My name is John Stewart. I'm Executive Director of FIU's Miami Beach Urban Studios, and I'm delighted to be here on a Monday night, as we've been now since March 30th, for Zen and the Art of, this would be Zen and the Art of Writing in America. And tonight I'm delighted that we have Brian Turner in a conversation with Pablo Cartaya. Pablo's been managing a series of conversations that have been amazing and inspiring, and I'm sure tonight will be no different. And I'm delighted that I'm here also with Deborah Briggs, who is a partner in crime on this with me from the Betsy Hotel, which in the real world is very close by, and in the Zoom world turns out to be even closer by.
Exactly.
So Deborah, take it away. It's always great to see you on these Monday nights, and love being here with you.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm delighted to actually see everyone on my screen. That's the power of Zoom. So I am Deborah Briggs, and I'm the Vice President for the Arts Program at the Betsy Hotel. We're really pleased, as John said, to welcome you guys once again. We've been developing this virtual community of arts lovers and appreciators for about 16 weeks now, and we have more than 1,000 households now that have joined us, and some for you folks that are coming every time. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the information you're sharing with us about ways to make this even better. So tonight, it's a pleasure to welcome Pablo Cartaya again, and as those of you who have joined us before know, he's very special to us at the Betsy, because he's been working with us for 6 or 8 years on our literary programs and in all genres. And it was so kind and sweet of him to agree to come back and do this during these times when getting together and talking about things that matter is so important, getting our minds off some of the struggles we're all facing in the real world, as they say. Before I introduce Brian and read his bio for you, I just wanted to thank some of our community partners, because they've really been instrumental in helping us to build such a robust community around the world who joins us. And that includes the City of Miami Beach. Proud to say FIU MBUS is a pillar organization in Miami Beach, and I've been a board member there for a number of years. That's how John and I know and have worked together for so long. And the Betsy Community Fund, which is the philanthropic affiliate of the Betsy, which is helping us to fund our closed captioning tonight. And John will share a little bit more about that before we get to our deep conversation. And I wanted to thank the Arts and Business Council Miami, who has been sending out flyers and letting everyone know what we're doing as well. And of course, there are others I failed to mention. And please know that we appreciate your support as well. So real quickly, so Brian Turner is really special to us at the Betsy. He's a 3-time visitor to our writer's room, which is our artist in residence program at the Betsy. And we met him when he was an artist in residence visiting with his late wife, Elise Kuznets, who was a wonderful, beautiful poet, who was a guest reader in our Jewish American and Holocaust Literature Conference one year. And so he's become a friend to the Betsy, and we know him as a soldier poet first. That's not all he is, and you'll hear when I read his bio, but Brian's a rare person who's traveled so many pathways in his life and shares poetry to tell us where he's been and where he's going. So let me tell you a little bit more factual about him. He has an MFA from the University of Oregon, and he's lived abroad in South Korea for a year before serving for 7 years in the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1999 with the 10th Mountain Division, and then in 2003 he was an infantry team leader for a year in Iraq with the 3rd Stryker Brigade Combat Team, 2nd Infantry Division. His book, Here, Bullet, chronicles his time in Iraq. And when we first met Brian, we knew him through that book. He's been featured on National Public Radio, the NewsHour with Jim Lair, the BBC. He's received an NEA Literature Fellowship, a Lannan Foundation Fellowship, and he's taught at Fresno City College and leads the MFA program at Sierra Nevada University in Tahoe, where Pablo Cartaya also teaches. He was featured in an Academy Award nominated film, Operation Homecoming. It's a unique documentary that explores the firsthand accounts of American service members through their own words. He's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, and his poems have been translated into Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, French, German, Hebrew, Italian, Polish, Serbo-Croatian, Spanish, Swedish, and more. It's such a delight to welcome Brian tonight. I'm going to quickly, before we go to Pablo to do the personal welcome, John, explain to folks how they can watch the closed captioning and see things as well as hear them. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So quickly, there's a small CC inside a box in the lower part of your screen. There's a caret next to it, and you can show the subtitles or hide the subtitles there. You can also see a full transcript of this and change the subtitle settings. And I also recommend that you watch this in speaker view. You'll see the speakers close up, and but if you want to see all your friends who are on with you, then definitely switch to gallery view. Anyway, with that, and I'll just say when we wrap this up, if you have questions, I will send a chat out and to everyone and invite you to send me questions, and I'll be collecting them and try to deliver them to Pablo and Brian as we go along. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for the intros and for the welcomes and the and for Deb for reading that beautiful bio of Brian's. We've been doing this now for a month, and I definitely don't feel like a broken record saying that I love this partnership. I love the idea that we can, in these unprecedented times, we can come together as a community, as a family, as a culture, even if it is under the auspices of electronic virtual meetings. At least we're coming together to talk about things that matter, as much as the Betsy's mantra is in everything. And I know FIU's. And so I just love the partnership, and I love being part of the family and part of the community. And, that I get to speak for an hour with my dear friends about life and literature and poetry, that's all I need in this world. My little fixes once a week to talk to my peeps and talk about things has been a real joy. So thank you for putting it all together. Brian, what's up, my man?
Hey, it's good to see you.
Yeah. How you doing, brother? It's good to see you. Got your hair's long.
Yeah, 1974 has arrived.
I see that your beard is nice and puffy.
I don't know what the deal is with this white lightning on the bottom and just brown hair up on top. It's not a planned thing,
You're like so. Mr. Fantastic, like the grades, It's been wild, huh? We've texted a couple of times, and you're just one of those people that you check in on your people. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. I've gone through some personal stuff that I've shared, and you just kind of just randomly text me, hey, how's it going? How you doing? How's the family? And, I appreciate you for that, man. Yeah. And it is. And, that's what I wanted to kick off with is this writing community that we've built, and that you continue to cast wider and wider nets. You sort of, I think, there's a bazillion accolades about you, right? I'm not going to embarrass you though and get into them, unless you want me to.
It's just a lot of bribes out there, man. I got little envelopes with cash. I just got to send them daily,
But I think that aside from being a dear friend, I think that what you have shown me and other writers is how to be a friend to the community of writers. That there isn't oh, I'm in poetry and you're in children and young adults, and so therefore we're not together, or you're in nonfiction and I'm in fiction and we don't separate. You create a community of writers, and I think that especially now we need that sort of understanding that we're all writing, we're putting words together to tell stories, and I think that's just a remarkable feat that you've done, and I applaud you for it, man.
I feel like you're putting a lot on me. You and I have collaborated quite a bit, so it's been a learning experience for me, and I really appreciate your wisdom and you always have a very clear way forward that helps me a lot. So I appreciate it.
Well, we spent a lot of time, when we talked a little while ago, we were like, okay, so what do we want this to look like? And I said, let's make it like if we're in, in those countless hours that we've spent in the living room or and Lake Tahoe, just talking about stuff. And sometimes it gets pretty profound.
It seems like it's usually in a car driving up a mountain.
In a car.
Right? When we're going from the airport up to the lake and it's just the two of us, and then I force you to listen to music that you probably would rather just wait to listen to later.
No,
I'm like, no, you got to listen to this, man.
And it's really great because I get in after you've already been there for a day or two. Yeah. And this is, and for those of you who don't know, it's like the Lake Tahoe. We, Brian he's the director and the creator of the MFA program, the low residency MFA program at Sierra Nevada University. And so twice a year, the faculty convenes with students on this beautiful Lake Tahoe campus. And we, spend 2 weeks there just kind of teaching and breaking bread together. And so I live in Miami and the flight, it's a good long flight, and Brian, and I'm always expecting that I'm going to take, a bus back or whatever. And Brian's always right there, picks me up. And right away we just get to talking. And I want to, because I read something in the New York Times that was written about my life as a foreign country, which is your memoir. And it's really kind of stayed with me. And I want to kick us off with maybe a little bit of that. So Jen Percy wrote in January 9th, 2015, there's a persistent idea in our culture that what we experience is true, while what we imagine is untrue. But without exploring the possibility of imagination in nonfiction, we leave out a fundamental part of the human experience. Digressive wanderings, the chaotic interior self, and most important, our empathy. Empathy, after all, starts as an act of fiction. We must think ourselves into the lives of others. And I just think that's so apt of you. That's so apt of your work. And I hope that maybe you can talk a little bit about that as it pertains to your writing, as it pertains to like what's going on in this world right now. Like this was written in 2015 and it feels very relevant right now.
Yeah. Well, I see the same in your work as well. This idea of, in trying as much as possible to cross and understand as much as possible where someone else is coming from, and the weight on their shoulders, that they might be invested in, but also might be handed down to them from generations even before their time, And with my own, for example, my first book I wrote when I was in Iraq, I was a soldier there. And I remember driving around a traffic circle once. And this was pretty, I think it was very soon after the sort of Abu Ghraib scandal came to light and everyone found out about the torture that was taking place. They might have known about it, but here were photos, here were names, here were things that were happening to Iraqi prisoners at the hands of American troops, right? And excuse me. And I think I remember driving around this traffic circle. It was in Mosul in the northern part of the country. And the vehicle that I was in was a Stryker. It's a 19-ton vehicle. It's big and green. It has looks like a big bird cage around it. And there's one soldier with a weapon system up front. And then in the back, there are usually two soldiers that are sort of what we'd say name tape defilade, which means our name tape on our uniform, we would be about that far out of the vehicle. So it's a tall vehicle. So when it goes through the streets, if you're on a sidewalk, then you might see the helmet or the top of the, you wouldn't see them because they're above you, right? So I had black glasses on. I had a helmet. I looked like any other soldier for the most part because we're all dressed identically, And I was looking straight out, but I had my head as if I was looking straight out, but actually my eyes were looking down towards the curb because in the roundabout, sitting on the curb was an old man. He had a long white beard and long hair. And he was crouched over with his knees almost up to his chest and his arms sort of hugging his chest. And he was looking at me. And I don't know if he knew that I was looking at him because I was trying to look as if I wasn't, I'm sorry for such a long thing. It's such a quiet,
no, that's please.
It's like this really quiet moment inside the middle of a war that won't get written down, And I remember looking at him, and he looked right at me, and he just kind of, I'm not an actor, so I can't do it, but he just kind of, you know, he just had this, there was some resignation and disapproval and just disappointment and all these layers of sadness, you know, in what we were doing and what we represented, you know. And I could feel it, and I registered in that quick moment, and then boom, it blurs away, and he's gone. Both of us are gone from each other's lives, you know. But you know, I was trying to kind of understand where he's coming from, and I have to read into his expressions, but it wasn't too hard, I don't think, you know. It's there's so much damage that can happen in a life, and like, how do we respond to each other about it, and what do we do about it from there once it's done, you know? I mean, you can see this now with the Confederate statues and stuff going out, right? And like all the, some of that damage is done, it's been done over centuries, you know. And now what do we do about it? There's things happening today, but there's also the past that's still alive in the present, you know.
Yeah.
How do we live with that, and what do we do about it, you know?
Yeah, and there's a reckoning happening, you know. And you know, I read an article today about this small town in Ohio that was in the national news because, you know, there was an armed, you know, white nationalist that came in for a protest that started in an all-white town, and then it's like this tiny little town is all up in arms with the teacher that organized it. And this is a white woman who was a teacher, and she's like, I wanted to be part of this movement. I wanted to, at least in solidarity, I didn't want to make a protest or anything. I just wanted to march in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And they called in these biker gangs to like intimidate these marchers, you know. And then the people of the town were complaining. It's like, well, why did you start this? Why did you do this? And some of her students were saying, you know, look what you've done. Some of her colleagues, look what you've done. This was a perfectly fine town before this. And I, you know, there's, you know, it's really eye-opening, you know what I mean? Like it's sort of like you know, it's difficult when you have to put a mirror to yourself and then sort of examine all the ugly parts, you know, that we don't, you know, when it's not such a flattering mirror and you're like, oh, wait a minute, you know. And I wonder what that's going to mean for our work, you know, like what, as writers, what does that mean? I mean, I know for me, like, interestingly, because I write primarily for young adults and kids, right? And so one of the things that I've turned to, and I talked to my editor about this, I was like, you know, I'm going to start writing like dystopian novels and fantasy, because I'm like, the world can't, I mean, these kids can't take any more real. Like I can't, I have, you know. So it's like, and my editor was like, yeah, I know. So I'm curious, like, where you dabble in so many different creative pursuits. Like, you're a musician, and yes, like, folks, when I tell you he's a musician, like, this guy has his own like record studio at home, and he's amazing. And he's done with his wife's poems. He's made this incredible album, and I encourage you, Brian, please pitch it because it's awesome. Sure. But, you know, so where does the art come in this moment? You know, like, where do we find, you know, like where do we find our point to attack, or our point to look towards and to write on?
You know, it's hard for me to, because I think about that, like, because we were both part of a community of writers at that college we were talking about before, and so people are, you know, look across a room of writers, and we could do the same here if we could see everybody's faces, I'm sure. And it's like like we need like an Emily Dickinson who's going to be inside the room writing her poems, maybe somewhat in secret a bit, and it's maybe internal stuff that's going to be very meaningful for others later. And there might be another kind of writers like out on the street, like right in the mix of it, you know. And so you know, it's hard because we're in this time. It's hard. I don't know. I can't answer the question, but in one sense, as I sort of fumble through it, you know, it seems like we're going to need people who are able to, because we're in a time of identity, and we're trying to figure out who are we as a people, you know. And there's these fractures and rifts, and it seems like two main tribes, but there's all these sub tribes and smaller tribes in different parts of, all these different clusters of communities might be another way of saying it, and then there's a lot of people who just feel adrift and alone, and in that swirling mix of, the coronavirus sort of pushing a lot of people at home, people going out of work, they're losing their jobs, and that's another way of saying they're losing their identity too, right? They get kicked out in the street and they're no longer a person who lives in a house, and now they're struggling to find their way in the world, and how do people look at them, and or they lose their job and they're in between jobs and trying to figure out, oh, I'm no longer that, I'm this now. And for me, most of the time, if I look over the course of my life, and it's hard to say in this moment, but if I look backwards, I guess one of my foundation stones, like complicity, and you had brought that up a few minutes ago, right? And I think complicity is one of the foundation stones of where I write from. So what I try to normally do is ask myself as much as I can, like a hard question, and to trouble myself. And then I usually think that if I can do that, and if I share a troubled question with another, it might find home in them too. And then we have to kind of figure out how to live in that world with this trouble. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean,
yeah.
I think you called, you called me, and then you called Patricia Smith, the poet Patricia Smith, when a lot of this started, and the first thing that you said is, what can we do on the university level to enact some real change in terms of, race and how we're approaching it.
Well, I've talked with you and Leah actually about it so far.
Oh, and Lee, sorry.
I was hoping with Patricia, but she was having her birthday party, and I was like,
oh, okay.
So,
well, Leah, but again, Lee, and I'm sure you will talk to Patricia, and I think that that's part of what I think is important is to go and seek out the counsel and seek out the opinions of people that might be affected, or that might be, have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah.
On that experience,
Yeah. With me, it's, and I know it's the same with you too, because you have friends across the states, but also friends globally, and I do too. We're very fortunate because I come from, I don't know how it was for you, but I come from 35681 Avenue 13 and a quarter in Madera, California, out in the county. It's between Fresno and Madera, and there's cattle rangeland out there, and you could hear coyotes when I was a kid, like hunting calves at night. And orange groves are nearby, so in the winter they were frozen. We'd have orange fights in the orange groves and stuff, and the farmer would let his Dobermans out, and you could hear their claws on the frozen ground chasing after us, and we'd all haul out of there to, So I come from this place that, about as close as we could get to seeing the outside world was like National Geographic. The magazine when it was delivered, so I dreamed that I might have friendships and meet people outside, but language and literature has like opened these doorways over the years and made friends around the world. So I'd always dreamed about having a book, but I never, and I wonder how you feel at this too. Like I never thought about after I had a book when I was younger. It was always like, oh, I hope someday I'll publish a book, and it was just like this thing, but then once I got it, then I realized it became this gift, that it was no longer about the book at all for me personally, and for the most part, it was really about all these different people that I got to meet through this conversation. And so, for example, right now, thinking about friends in India, who the last couple of years I've been meeting a lot of people there and becoming friends with people. And so there are different issues taking place there, and they're having a different cultural moment, and but the pandemic is still pushing the culture there in a way that's really profound. Like, for example, they shut down a lot of the railway lines. And so a lot of people were migrant workers, like hundreds of thousands of them, basically just had to put whatever they had, any food or stuff or a bottle of water, and just walk home. And we're talking across entire states of India to get home, wherever that might be. Some of them dying on the way home, And so it's a profound moment for them, but just different than ours, and it's really, it's hard and fascinating and difficult. I'm not sure what I'm learning from it, but our world is going through a massive change right now, and it's going to be interesting to see. I hope that we can kind of stick to some of these things and figure some of these things out. Like you said, what are those points that we need to write to and articulate, right? Like, I hope some of us are going to find ways to do that, so that so that kind of the momentum of new growth that might come out of this difficult time, that it can be as many new leaves as possible, you know.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's
Mm.
it seems it's
Yeah.
it seems like I was telling Lee Herrick, for those of you who weren't in yet last week's conversation, that it feels like we're fighting on multiple battles. There's like,
Yeah.
it's like a multi-pronged war that we're fighting, and it sometimes it feels so overwhelming,
Mm.
especially when you're asked to weigh in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's and you're asked to weigh in, and then you're just starting to think, and you're like, yeah, I mean, I can contend with this. And then like I'm also just like trying to make sure that my daughter isn't sick anymore. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I was
and
going to
then I'm
say,
worried.
you're a dad too,
Yeah.
like,
And then I'm worried about my dad getting COVID. He's 88 years old. And my
yeah.
mom calling me saying, oh, I think I have it, like, and this stuff. So there's like that personal life stuff
Mhm.
that is happening. And then we're sort of, contending with, our role as artists, and bearing witness to what's happening, and what do we do about it? And how do we engage in a meaningful way?
Yeah. This is hard. I guess this might, it leads me to think about what I'm doing right now, which is, um, it makes me question whether or not it's valid what I'm doing, in a sense, because it feels a little selfish. And what I'm doing right now is I'm working on 100 short meditations that connect. They're short essays that write about. It's a memoir about kind of a conversation in memoir of me talking with my wife who's passed away, right, with Elise. And
I
but
think
it's
that's
also
really
like,
relevant, Brian. That's super
well,
relevant.
and it's it's connected to nature. So every one of them has something to do with nature. So it's really a book of nature essays, but it's really me talking with her in nature, and in part because, like, I don't know how to talk with people as much as I felt like I used to be able to. Like, I always
Yeah,
have a very easy conversation with you, but
right.
in general, with most people, it's kind of hard to create something that's sustained, and just like you and I just drop right into it.
Yeah, we do.
Most people not. So it's like, what? That's one of the reasons I go to language, is to try to. I want to be in conversation, but I usually have to be in conversation with the dead. You know.
Is the Peace and Brevity, is that part of the
Yeah.
memoir?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful piece. It's a good segue, because I want, if
Mm.
you feel comfortable, I mean, I'd love for you to read something. I'm sure that anybody
Sure. Sure.
out there
I'm happy to read
listening.
that if. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that was a perfect set. We always kind of just find the, the right moment. That piece, I'm even thinking about it now, and it's getting me a little bit like it's like getting me goosebumps.
Well, I hope I don't destroy it by reading it, but okay.
No,
It's
yeah, I
called,
mean, it
yeah,
would be great if, yeah, that would be
sure.
awesome.
It's called Anna Maria Island. Did you know that the common housefly, like the one circling the room now in a wide counterclockwise circuit, hums in the key of F? It's true. They come in different sizes, of course, but their bodies scale so that the vibrations of their wings correlate to the pitch intervals in F major: F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, the octave above. Their wings are made for this. I didn't know that back in 2015. There was so much I didn't know. That summer, I didn't know that you had only 1 year left to live. We stood beside each other in the tiny kitchen and prepared a dinner of rice and melted cheese, your favorite, as it reminded you of your childhood, a rare pleasure from that time, and helped to ease the nausea from the row of pills you'd laid out on the table. We told each other that we were living with cancer, that this was possible. The monsoon rains poured from the sky as thunder rolled over the peninsula from the Gulf Coast to the Atlantic seaboard. We'd rented a cottage on our favorite beach with sliding glass doors opening onto a sandy path that wound through ice plant dunes and soon give way to tufts of sea oats, and 50 meters out, the salt of the tide curling into the boom of the surf. I drank from a bottle of coconut rum, and the rum added a sugary sizzle to our lips when we kissed. I can feel the tips of my fingers at the small of your back even now, your hair brushing the side of my neck, the fragrance of your hair after floating in the warm waters of the Gulf hour after hour earlier in the day, the salt of the ocean on your skin. There were days like this, whole afternoons lived in suspension, floating, ruin stalled out and gliding on its own silence somewhere off in the distance. The housefly circles past, and I've returned to another unlivable year, 2020, with this fly humming in B flat as I stare out the kitchen window. Its flight path is reminiscent of the Earth's orbit around the sun, and the note thrumming in the fly's wings has a bitter note timbre to it, or bittersweet timbre to it. Vivaldi, I think, the Four Seasons. It was composed with the sound of flies written into a figuration of notes in F major, maybe the only time flies have appeared in classical music, and this housefly, so singular in its hypnotic focus, banks around me as though trying to spin me backwards in time. But that earlier fly, the one on the coast on our little love nest on the ocean, that fly was drunk on the moment. Its wings hummed along to the girl from Ipanema as it swooned its way through the damp ocean air, dizzy with circling two lovers who circled each other. With a lifespan of only 14 days, it swam drunkenly around us as we danced in the kitchen and laughed, the thunder rolling over and past and on towards some day we hadn't landed in yet. Each grain of rice expanded with water as the heating element began to glow on the stove. Tree frogs sang to the storm outside. Inside, the two of us were multiplied in that fly's vision. As the common housefly has between 3,000 to 6,000 simple eyes that comprise each of their two complex eyes. So many versions of us walked barefoot through the doors and into the rain, kissing each other, dancing, laughing. And that fly's tiny yet intricate brain gathered in each and every one of us, however incomplete, however fragmented. This a definition of love on planet Earth. The fly would have these memories to think back on days later when we packed up and drove home. That's when the fly, resting on the windowsill, stared at the blue-green swells of the ocean rolling in, the sound of it muffled by panes of glass. The muscles in its legs slumped forward, then gave out. And maybe that's when the fly remembered you saying that as a young girl, you'd seen horses in the curling salt of the wave when it crashed, galloping towards shore. Uncountable horses. And when the fly looks for them, it's true. There they are, with manes of salt pulled back by the wind, the horse shoulder to shoulder, galloping in. Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, to give folks some context as to who your wife was, I wonder if you could share how to build a Stradivarius.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that folks,
yeah.
this is from her book of poems, Angel Bones, which is
You know, I've never told you this, Pablo, but every time I go somewhere, I take this with me and then I put it on the nightstand when I'm there. But here's a photo of us out there at Anna Maria Island. And so, yeah.
You know, it's funny, just a side story. If you remember Elise, we met at, Elise introduced us at the Betsy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you remember what she told you, she goes, you need to get Pablo in your program. You need to get Pablo teaching in your program.
That's true.
He writes for young people. You got to get him in. and we've been together ever since, man.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. It's from Angel Bones, her second book. How to Build a Stradivarius. The masters wrote, to yield the best result, harvest after a cold winter, the wood condensed by ice and storms, in whose gales the highest notes are born. From summits of Balkan maple, red spruce gathered in a valley off the Italian Dolomites, they carved each instrument's alluvial curves. Then came the varnish, one coat of painter's oil, another of plain resin. Only the thinnest of layers to obtain that satin chatoyancy, that liminal reflet. It said Stradivari, playing to the trees, first noticed the straight pines like strings on a vast divine violin absorbing heaven's vibrations. The truth could be found in the song itself, how it was impossible to tell where the wood ceased and the song began, notes pure as a mathematical equation, transposing mountain, valley, mountain again. So for at least cousinets.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that we're at a good time to maybe take some questions from the
Sounds good.
audience, and then I'll circle back, and
Sure.
we can wrap up. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing both of those poems.
Appreciate
So
it. Thank you.
we have a few questions. It's been really amazing. One of them was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the title of your first book, Here Bullet, and how it, I don't know, what it meant to you then, what it could mean to us now.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty long story actually, but if I do a short condensed version, which to the person who asked, there are several different parts of the story, but I was in Iraq. The photo, well, it's behind you there, so you can, behind you, John, but in case those people can't see it, there's a photo there.
Yes, I can speak loudly, and then my image might come up.
Yeah,
we
we were near Balad, which is north of Baghdad. Our unit had done a raid on a small, a medium-sized village, many homes, and I was part of what might be called the enemy prisoner of war collection area or something. Basically, we had detainees. They weren't. I don't think of them as any enemy prisoners of war, but they were set in a circle. They were sitting down. They had their hands flex cuffed behind their backs. They had sandbags over their heads so that they couldn't see our equipment, and so they couldn't necessarily talk with one another to corroborate their stories, for example. They were in a wide circle. My soldier of mine, Jakowski, was in the middle, and he took a photograph of me standing outside of the circle. The image has been changed because in the original image, there are 3 of the Iraqi prisoners are in the foreground on their knees, facing away from the camera. So the image has the soldier looking at these 3 have been captured. And my editor was immediately taken by the photograph and wanted it. Now, I was very much against this idea of the subjugation and me as being powerful, one soldier being more powerful than the many. And I thought there were just many questionable things about that photograph that I didn't want to kind of perpetuate, I suppose, is a way to put it. And you can see their vehicle tracks. There was a vehicle there behind me. We took that out because at the time, this book came out very early while the war was fairly new at that point, I suppose. Although I would argue that it was just ongoing from the 1991 war. I don't think there are 2 Gulf Wars. There's just one, but for Americans, it feels like 2 because we sent troops over twice, kind of thing. So we took that out because on balance too, there wasn't something on the other side of the photograph, and visually that there's also a little bit of watercolor effect, which I wanted more of, and the publisher wanted less of, to more realism kind of thing. But I think part of it's because of my stance, the way I'm standing there. I'm leaning on my right foot and my left foot is forward, and it kind of looks like a badass, I suppose, which I'm not, and I wasn't. I'd recently had a surgery before I went there, and I probably shouldn't have even been there. I hadn't healed up from it. I still haven't. I get a disability each month for paycheck from the government for it, but I wasn't. I had learned I had a lot of weight, with all the gear and equipment. And I learned to lean back on my right foot as much as possible to take the pressure off of my front foot. And so that became a very natural stance for me. But in the photo with them there, it's kind of a John Wayne looking photograph. And that's not what I wanted to put out in the world. And the poems are very lonely in a lot of ways. And so this image, to me, seems more appropriate. Like, this kind of made sense to me. Like, I felt kind of alone when I was in Iraq, even though I was with a group of a lot of people. And yeah, so to me, it seemed to speak from the perspective of what was happening in the poems, and also this idea of torture that the sandbags evoke after Abu Ghraib, for example. Like my second book, if I'd chosen it, I think it would have been more appropriate, maybe in that sense, to have prisoners involved. Maybe not that photo, but something like that, because the second book talks about torture more, and that's what the poems are about. So that's a short-winded way of saying the longer story. So.
We
I
had
hope that's
another
helpful.
question that kind of relates to that. Which came first, the poet or the soldier, the poetry or the war?
Oh, the poetry. I wrote. My mom will tell you when I was 7 and she remarried to my dad. That I didn't know what a honeymoon was all about. So I wrote them stories and stuff to take, and cartoons that they could take with them because I thought they'd be bored. And I was like, "Here's stuff so you aren't bored," you know. And they took those stories. So I was already trying to write stories at the time, and I'd always thought that I'd be maybe a novelist. And when I was a kid, short stories was what I liked to write. And I think in my teens, I started writing poems and lyrics for the band that I ended up being a part of. And I thought the lyrics were practice for helping me write in that band. In fact, by the time I got to college, I took a poetry class, hoping that it would help me write better lyrics for the band. And that's the point where they diverged for me very clearly. And I started to see it as its own art form, that they work for me. They work song lyrics work very differently than the way a poem operates as a creative vehicle, or stanza means room, right? So as these rooms, they work very differently than the way song lyrics work. So yeah, I'd been a machinist, a student, and a wide variety. I was a pickler at one point, which is where you take a weird tool and you bust apart wood pallets and stuff. So I did a wide variety of jobs. I had one job. The worst job injury I had was in a grocery store. I had a can of guava nectar fall from the top shelf and hit me on the head when I was down below. So I was a machinist for many years. I was a soldier after I was a machinist, after I was a student, after I was a pickler, after. So I'd written 7 books before my first book, but thankfully the world didn't want the first 7 because I'm a slow learner too, and I needed time to learn the craft and the trade. And I say it
And
that way. I needed to
such
find
a
my voice. Yeah.
Right, it's such a great thing hearing this. I mean, I know these stories, but it's great to be able to say, because a lot of times it's like there's Brian Turner, oh, the poet, he wrote here, here Bullet wrote, the Hurt Locker and and all this stuff, and you're like, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. I've
Yeah.
been, I've been at this for a long time, and I was actually writing stories, and I've done a lot of different kinds of jobs, before
Mhm.
I can be here in front of you. And I think it
Mhm.
adds, to your stories, and I love, I love that you were like, I'm trying to write words so that I can write songs for my band, like I was writing,
Yeah.
and people love this now when I say this, but I was like, actually, it was kind of selfish. I started writing so that I can write roles for myself with people that were like me, like
Yeah.
the Pablos of the world, right? So I
Yeah. Yeah.
started writing scripts. That's how I started, my writing career, and it was because I was like, well, I don't want to, I
Mhm.
want to write roles that I can star in. Um, and then
Yeah.
everybody now, when I sell that story, they're like, oh my God, it's because you wanted to see, because you weren't seeing yourself in stories. I'm like, no, I just wanted to be a star. Like I wanted to be, like that's what I wanted at first. But later on, you come to
Sure.
think about it, and it's
Yeah.
interesting. My daughter now, 13 years old,
Mm.
she's now has written in quarantine her second screenplay.
Uh,
And she
yeah.
says, and she goes, I'm going to star in them because
Mm.
only I can play these characters.
Wow.
And so it's
Yeah.
kind of cool. Like we
Yeah.
sort of come in, and who knows, she might end up being a poet. I mean, I don't,
Or
so
both.
it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's an interesting, there's no straight line to our journeys, I guess
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I want to add some fun to this. If you if you YouTube Brian Turner,
Oh.
um, there is a natural vegan bodybuilder named Brian Turner, and
Yes.
his
Yeah.
motto is, I'm here to relate, teach a bit, and have fun with you guys through my videos. So, and if you see him, he's like super buff, and I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
actually, Brian Turners are very, or I don't want to veer you off of where you're going with that
no,
though.
go ahead. It was just a
Oh,
fun
well,
little diversion.
for our faculty at the school where we're at, I have Google alerts for everyone. So because a lot of times you all won't tell me what's happening and good stuff that's going on. So I want to put it out though. And I have one for myself too. And Patricia Smith and Brian Turner, we both have very common names of all of us. So daily I get alerts of what Patricia Smith is doing and what Brian Turner is doing in the world. And there's the bodybuilder. There's also another strong one who was at one point was the ninth strongest man in the world. He would pull airplanes with his teeth with like a rope and stuff.
That's the same Brian Turner?
Yeah. In fact, there's one of the weirdest things I ever had was I sent, before I had a book publisher like that, I was sending poems out around the world to different magazines, hoping to get published and stuff. And I sent one to a now defunct magazine called The Sun down there in New Zealand. And it was rejected, the weirdest rejection I've ever had of all of them, which was, don't even try to pass yourself off as Brian Turner, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that's a quote. And what it was the poet laureate of New Zealand is my father's age, Brian Turner. Very fine poet. You know, and they all know his work. And then I'm sending this other completely, they're like, no.
Wow.
Don't even try to.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And I've since, I was on Radio New Zealand, and it was like one of those 1.5 minute interviews. So they ask you a question, you know, so I didn't answer the question. I just veered off and told that story because I wanted to tell it, you know, because and it did what I wanted, which is he contacted me through the Poetry Foundation. So now we've been in touch and stuff.
Nice.
I had this dream of opening with him, and it'd be Brian Turner reading together. You have
this unbelievable gift for that, man. I have to give it to you. Like you just find a way to connect people. You know, that's probably why Deborah loves you so much, because you're just like her in this, like, just connect. You just want to connect everybody, and just like, you know, I think of like a humanist, you know, and just, you know, like, yes, poet and all these things, but just like a truly beautiful soul.
Man, right,
and I'm
back
privileged.
at you, man.
I'm privileged to know you and to call you a brother and all that stuff. And I just really appreciate you, man. So
I love you too, Pablo. Yeah,
in this, our, I don't know, 6th, 7th, John, I don't know, what is it? You know,
yeah, it's going to be our fifth or sixth.
Iteration now, closing this this iteration, because we do have another one next week, but closing this iteration with Brian, you know, and we always kind of try to wrap it up with this idea of, you know, you talk about the deep stuff, and then you think about, like, how do we find our zen in the midst of all of this stuff. For me, it's been, you know, talking with my people about the tough questions, but in this case with you, it's just the privilege of knowing someone like you. You know, that gives me a lot of peace, you know, that I know that someone like you in this world is out there doing the work and is out there, like, just being a better person. So that's my piece.
Now I have to live up to that. So thank you.
Don't fuck it up now. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Deb. Deb is like,
okay, all right.
Yeah.
No.
So Pablo, you know, if you're next time you're coming through, stop by. You know, the house is always yours. So.
All right, man. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Next week, Deb, we have another poet that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. So I just wanted to echo what Pablo said, Brian. I really appreciate your being here and sharing your story with everyone. I encourage everyone to go out and read a little Brian's poetry and his memoir to get a sense for.
And buy his books.
And buy his books.
Please, buy the books. Read the poems, buy the books.
Yeah, gotcha. You're correct. So anyway, next week is the final installment of Zen and the Art of Writing in America. And yeah, I'm pleased to say that we're going to focus on my dad next week. And it's a little bit interesting because I actually connected with Brian because my dad was a soldier poet in World War II. He wrote, we still have, like, in my mom's home, my mom's 101, by the way. We still have the letters he wrote her during the war, World War II. And a lot of his poetry is about being a soldier poet. So at the Betsy, I went out looking for another soldier poet, a contemporary one, which is how I found and met Brian probably 10 years ago now. And so next week, actually, we're going to show a documentary about my dad and talk about his work a little bit, because my dad, my brother and I sort of brought his work to Miami, and the 1,000 artists in residence have sort of touched his work. Most of them had never heard of him before he was born in 1911. We'd be 109 next week, so we thought on his birthday we would talk about him a little bit. And sort of in that vein, I wanted to say to you, Brian, it was very special to hear you read your wife's work. Poetry gives us a chance to have someone live on, and the way they think about things live on. And so I've always said, my dad died when I was 3, but I feel privileged to have had a dad who was a poet. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have known him. So we do know Elise through you. I was privileged enough to know her myself, but her poetry is so beautiful. And so I want to thank you again for taking a moment of your time tonight to do that. So anyway,
Thank you so
join
much.
us next Monday night.
If you don't mind, just one
Yeah.
second, I just want to say it was a privilege to meet your father through his poems as well. So thank you.
Thanks. So basically, it's sort of cool. Next week, we're going to have a talk back about a documentary called Chaim Plutzik, American Poet. And so during the week, you can access the movie in partnership with the Miami Jewish Film Festival. They're showing it in their virtual cinema. And so anybody who RSVPs will send you access, and then we'll have a conversation, just like we've done tonight. So until then, I want to say thank you. And John probably
I'm going to have, if it's okay, I'm going to have Paloma say goodnight, because she has been.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
She's fully recovered now, but she had a double ear infection, and she got tested positive for COVID a month ago, and she's just been a trooper.
Okay. Hello.
And here she is. Say hi. Say hi.
That's our littlest poetry fan.
One other question came in. Brian, can you remind us of the name of your wife's collection of poetry that you read from? It was asked.
Sure. It's called Angel Bones.
Angel Bones.
And then her first book is called Small Hours.
Small Hours. Thank you. It just came. The question just came in.
Sure.
Take us out, John.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'm going to unmute everybody or allow everybody to unmute themselves if they want to clap for you or give you a shout out or whatever. I'm allowing everybody to unmute. And thank you so much. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Pablo. Really appreciate you, Brian. Great.
And just as we say at the Betsy, just keep the conversation going.